thanks for tuning in. You can see the bees are putting some honey away. The weather's warming up here. It's been a little bit chilly. We usually have a fairly short winter season in this area, and there's spring usually comes early, so spring's just about to start, it seems. My name's Pete. Pete is away this week, and we'd just do a brood inspection on this colony here. We might pull out some flow frames and see how far they fill them up, so we know what stage they're at. Just check out the brood box and see how strong this colony is. You can see a lot of bees already. Already looking quite strong. But we'll go into the brood box and check them out. Down in my bee yard, which is just down the hill from here in a macadamia nut orchard, I've been seeing drones in my brood boxes, and I've been making splits. So I'm just going to blow a puff of smoke in the entrance, just to let the bees know I'm coming in. And this colony is usually quite friendly, so I don't generally like wearing a jacket and veil, but if they start stinging me, then I'll put my veil on. It all depends on your level of comfort with the bees. If you're a beginner, do recommend suiting up, putting your gloves on. I'm just gonna crack the top very slowly and gently. See some small hive beetle here. I like to squash them, because if they get a foothold and start laying eggs, their maggots can take over and slime out the hive. You really don't want that. The bees are usually fairly good at controlling them, and I think what happened here was they were actually in jail here. The bees put them in jail and do guard duty over them, and when I pull the lid off, that lets them out of jail. So I'll just get the smoke up. I just want to move these bees out of my way so I'm not squashing them. And I'll usually go for the middle frame, because that seems to be the one that the bees will fill first, and I'll leave the side ones till last. That's looking beautiful. We can see that lovely capped honey. Just gently put it down and just move these bees out of the way. They just haven't filled this little part of the frame yet. I'm just blowing them to move them. So usually what happens when the bees eat their honey, they'll eat it above the brood nest. If you can imagine, this is just above the nest, and what they'll do is they'll move their cluster up and they'll eat the honey in that semicircle. So it's quite common to see this part of the frame not filled. It looks like they're getting onto it, so that's great news. And here's the other side. And the bees don't like having open honey in their hive, so you can see them all here cleaning it up. And it won't take them long, probably a couple of minutes, maybe 5 or 10 minutes, and that'll all be gone. So I might put this back in. Try and be careful not to squash the bees. When you're putting a flow frame in, the part down underneath can be a little bit of a bee guillotine sometimes. So be really careful that there's no bees there. Okay, now we'll take the super off. I might go around the other side, I think. So the bees are just starting to go for me. I like to smoke myself. It seems to help. And like I said, if they start stinging me, I'll put my jacket on. I like to go above the queen excluder when I'm splitting a hive. That's just my preference. Just put that down. Oh, it's heavy. That's a good sign. Also, I lay it on its end, and that just saves the bees under here from getting squashed on the ground or and getting stuck in the grass or anything like that. You can also put it on the inner cover. So you can put your inner cover like that, pop it on that. There's a bee next to my microphone. Here you can see another example of the bees cleaning up all the open honey. So we'll pry this excluder off. Sometimes the excluders can spring and flick bees everywhere, so sometimes it can be good to just twist it off like that and look for the queen on the underside. I can't see her. Oh.
Yeah. Wondering, you know that frame that you first pulled out?
Yeah.
It looked like it was quite full. When do you reckon you'd harvest that?
You could actually harvest that now, but it really depends on what's coming in outside, how cold or how warm it is, and whether there's a flow on or not. So what you can do, if you're seeing a frame like that, you can, if your other frames are full, also you can just harvest that frame and then see what the bees do. If they start filling that frame again, then you know you're pretty safe to harvest. If they just leave it, then you know just to leave it alone. But it really does depend on the season and what's happening, what the bees are bringing in. What? It's got stung. Here we go. If you've got any questions, please write them in the comments below and I'll do my best to answer them.
Great, Pete. We've got a few people coming in, and Chuck, our ambassador from Arizona, has joined us this morning or this afternoon.
Cool. Hey, Chuck.
Got a question coming. Got Jay Sells just saying, got a bit of mould on the outside of the frames and the super. Do they need to do anything about that?
I don't think so. Usually the bees will clean it up. Mould on the inside of the super on the frames just means that your bees aren't getting to that spot. So the population may be a little bit low. It may be too cold and they're not going to that part of the super. And you might find that that side of the super is in the shade all the time, perhaps. So you could experiment with changing the orientation of your box to get the sun on that side and see what happens there. But generally the bees will clean that up when they want to use the space. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, great, Pete. And Luke's just asking, and is it common for a frame to have both brood and honey?
Yes, it's very common. Not a flow frame, obviously, because in the flow system you probably want to use a queen excluder on top of your brood box so the queen doesn't go upstairs and try and lay in your flow frames. But in the brood nest, yes, it's really common to have brood and honey. So generally, if you see the brood box as a three-dimensional nest and you discount the frames, you can see it as the queen usually lays her brood pattern in a half sphere like this across the box. I might get my jacket on in a sec. I'm getting stung. There's a half sphere inside the box like this. So what you'll find is frames will have a circle or a semicircle of brood like that, and then a big strip of honey in a kind of a rainbow pattern. And usually there'll be a bit of pollen, like there's a little interface of brood, pollen and honey. And yeah, I'll get my jacket on. Thanks, Trace.
You're getting a little bit stingy for your Pete.
A little bit stingy. So you can see already the population of this colony is really good. And that's what you want to see when you're opening up the hive.
Yeah, we've got a few people commenting, Pete, they're amazed that you didn't have your suit on. Pete, often you see him down here, he's playing his tune, he loves his music and he's got his beats going and he's harvesting without a suit on. But today I think he's not happy with it.
No, they're a little bit feisty today.
Yeah.
I just generally don't like wearing a suit because I can't really see through the veil and it gets quite hot.
Which is why we've now brought out our new cleared new wood.
There you go.
Go.
So I generally just take out the second frame because the first frame can sometimes be stuck to the wall. Really slow and gentle. So here's a great example of what I was just talking about actually, is just lay that down gently there. You can see that half sphere of brood there. Then you get a little just around the edge. There's that shiny pollen there, and then here's the capped honey around the top. You can see I've broken up some capping there. The bees are cleaning that up. So I know there's a lot of different coloured pollen that's come in, which is a really great sign because you want your bees to have a lot of different pollen. Much like us, they need a varied diet. And pollen is their protein source, while their honey is their source of carbohydrate. So
Pete, with that pollen that you've just spoken about, question coming in, will that become brood or will they eat that and then it becomes brood?
Yeah, they eat the pollen and it stimulates a gland in their heads called the hypopharyngeal gland, and that makes royal jelly, which they then feed to the larvae for the first 3 days. And then they feed a substance called bee bread, which is also, apparently it's also part royal jelly, I believe. But it's not as strong in its enzymes and hormones. So that's why you generally see pollen around the brood, because they want it fairly close to their brood. And you can tell there's a lot of pollen coming in on the front of your hive, on the landing board. You can generally tell that the queen is doing quite well and laying up lots of brood. I'm just blowing on the bees to move them. So just touch them to move them also. Here's a really nice patch of brood. You can tell it's quite large and there's not many cells missing. I think the cells that are missing have already hatched a new bee out, and then the bees have started putting pollen in those cells. You can see the colours. Here you can see two bees feeding each other. You can see a group of them over here, just there. So we'll flip the frame over. If you're using foundationless frames, you can see this is naturally drawn. There's no wires in this frame. This started out with just an empty space, and there's a starter strip up here which encourages the bees to draw their comb naturally. If you tip this on an angle like this, that comb can bend and break out. So what I like to do is keep it all in plane with gravity and swing it around like a door, and then you can hold it upside down if you want. So lots of lovely coloured pollen, which is a great sign, and lots of brood, which is another great sign. It means the bees are gearing up for the springtime. And we'll check this first frame. If you have any questions, like I said, please write them in the comments below.
Yep, look, some great questions coming in, and people commenting. Also, Pete, on you wearing the suit, but obviously we recommend beekeepers to wear bee safety equipment and suits and suit up as well.
Definitely.
Anyway, so question coming in: why do bees bed on the front of the hive when it's really warm? What causes that?
The bees work really hard to regulate the temperature of their colony. I believe they have to have it from 34 to 36 degrees. I think 35 degrees Celsius is the optimum temperature that they like to keep it. And if you've got a hive that has a good population, the warmth of their bodies actually is something that they want to get rid of. So on a hot day, they'll all go outside and just cluster on the front, just to get their body heat out of the hive environment, and just helps to regulate the temperature inside the nest and keep it at that 35 degrees Celsius. So I can see lots of pollen here. It's really great. Lots of different colours in this bottom. So this is a side frame, and they keep their honey and pollen out on the side. Generally, it's a good thermal mass, so it creates good insulation out on the side, but also it's a lot harder for an invader to get at when it's out on the side of the box.
Pete, Jodie's asking a question, and I'm thinking there probably may be somewhere near us, because I know we're forecasted for some hot weather this weekend. So they're just wondering, should they check the hive, or should they just leave it till winter is over, because we are forecasted to get sort of some 26-degree days this weekend?
It's a really good question. If your days are nice and warm like this, I would say yes. It would be fine to check your hive and see where it's at. Get an idea of what's happening going into spring. Obviously, if it's cold, you don't want to do that, and you don't want to do it on a cold or sort of less warm afternoon. You really want to do it in the morning when the sun's out and it's hitting the hive, and make sure that the bees don't spend too much time heating their hive back up after you've pulled it apart. But yeah, so if you've got a nice warm sunny day with not much wind, a bit like today, I would say definitely go in and have a look.
And we're also mentioning, a couple of people are just asking in terms of that too, Pete, with the suits that we have, the three-layered mesh, which is the jacket that Pete's got on, which breathes a little bit easier. So people are asking, are there different suits and different fabrics for warmer climates? So
Definitely, and having said that, I do get hot, but these suits are the best. They're really, really great. They let the air right through, and when it's breezy, it provides a lot of relief.
Yep.
Actually.
We've got some, Ian's coming from Thailand saying, no, they just have to sweat it out.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I can imagine. I'm seeing a lot of brood in this colony, which means these guys are really pretty bumper. There's going to be a lot. Here's a little baby bee just emerging here. There's going to be a lot more bees in the coming weeks in this hive. So it's actually, let's just see it emerging. This hive is actually one to watch because its population is quite high, and as the spring starts happening more and more and the flow starts happening, we might need to split this hive early just to avoid it swarming.
Pete, this is a good question. Who caps the brood cell? Is it the brood in the cell or the other workers?
Yeah, good question. It's the other workers. So the workers do a lot of jobs in the hive before they even go outside at all. So they spend 3 weeks inside the hive doing a bunch of different jobs, and one of those jobs is to check and feed the larvae. Apparently they check a single larvae over 1,300 times a day, and when that larvae is ready to pupate, those bees, we call them nurse bees, will then cap that cell. And after the cell's capped, then the magic happens underneath it. The grub spins itself a little cocoon and completely rearranges its body and metamorphoses. I don't know the word.
Incredible. I wonder if there's any footage of that inside, the little bee doing that.
The incredible footage.
Yeah. Pete, how do you check the moisture content of your honey if you want to, once you've harvested it?
Good question. I don't really have much experience of that because I don't generally do it, but I believe you can get something called a hygrometer. Refractometer. Thanks, Stone. And it measures the specific gravity of the honey. Is that right?
Moisture content.
Okay, moisture content. There you go. So that's a good one for the team to get in touch and answer that question in more detail, because like I said, I haven't had much experience of doing that. I just kind of go off generally. If the honey's capped, then it's usually good. You can see here actually the bees have been eating this honey. You can see the little fractures in the capping where the bees stick their proboscis in. You can see them eating it up. I'm seeing a lot of eggs on this frame as well. Haven't spotted the queen yet, but may have missed her. Sometimes you can chase her across the hive as you go.
Pete, can you, this is a question from Jason, can you checkerboard your frames to build new comb on empty frames?
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's what I like to do myself, especially if you're not using foundation. If you're putting 2 blank frames together in a colony, the bees don't have a guide either side, so they like to fill that space in any way they want. So it just does encourage them to draw crooked. So if you put a fully drawn frame, then a blank frame, then a fully drawn frame, it gives the bees walls as a guide to draw their comb nice and straight. And if you put, obviously this is all depending on what's happening outside, whether there's a flow on, whether your colony's got a healthy population or not. because you don't want to leave empty space in a small colony. But if you put your blank frame towards the middle of the nest, the bees are much more likely to draw it out because they'll want to use that space so the queen can lay. They'll want the comb in there. They don't like the empty space in the middle of the nest. You can see eggs there.
Morning. We're a bit grumpy.
Morning mirror.
See if we can see them.
It's our bee spy mirror.
Let's see. The eggs.
There we go.
Watch out, bee. Oh, there we go. Little egg back there in the bottom. So. Watch out, bee. You can see it, but nice. Cool. Loading up, aren't they?
They're definitely looking crowded.
Pete, on that note, a couple of people just asking, so if you were to split this hive, how do you know which frames to take out?
It sort of depends what you're planning to do. If you're planning to do what we call a walkaway split, it would be in my veil.
Yeah, I noticed that you have a bee in your veil.
They're fine. They just go into the light. If you're planning to do what's called a walkaway split and let them make their own queen, and you don't generally mind where the queen ends up because the one without the queen will then obviously make a queen, provided she's got the resource. The bees have got the resources to do so. So what I generally do is I make sure there's eggs in both boxes. The split box, I want to have the best chance of making it. So I'll try and keep both boxes very strong, meaning I'll actually shake bees into the split box. It all depends on finding the queen. You don't really want to shake the queen into the other box. Like I said, it just depends what you're trying to do. There's a bit of a convoluted answer. But to go in my split, I generally pick frames that have a lot of capped brood, because then I know these bees will hatch straight out and help the split's numbers. And I'll choose frames with eggs and young larvae as well. And you want plenty of these nurse bees. So the nurse bees are generally the ones that are on the brood already, and they won't fly home because they haven't been outside yet, so they don't actually know where they live. So when they graduate to becoming what we call field bees, they'll geolocate to their spot. And if we just get nurse bees in our split, then they won't fly out and fly back to their old location.
And so, Pete, in saying that, would you leave the queen in the original hive?
Yeah, you can. And you can get your split to make their own queen, or you can do the reverse. Some people say that taking the queen into the split and moving her elsewhere can actually simulate a swarm. So you make that colony think that they've actually swarmed, and that can mitigate swarming even more than just reducing the population. So that's the last frame, and I must have missed the queen, but that's okay. We know she's in there because we've seen eggs. The other thing I would note is that there are drones. So here's a drone here. There's not heaps, but there are a few. And what I'm seeing in my own yard down the hill is quite a lot of drones, which tells me that it's okay to try and make splits and get queens mated. And it is a little early, but I like to just try things and see what happens.
And Pete, is there anything, Sharon's just asking, so if your brood box is quite full but they haven't really taken to the super yet, is there anything you can do with, and just worried that are they likely to swarm, and if not, do you still need to split it?
No, if they haven't taken to the super, it's generally a sign that you wouldn't need to split them. If the brood box is quite crowded, then and there's a flow just about to start, they'll probably go up into your super. Sometimes it can take a long time for them to go up there, just depending on the season and the strength of the colony. But it is worthwhile waiting and just keep monitoring their population. I don't know if you tuned in early, you could see the population in the super. We might just get a shot of that over on the super, over here. So you can see the brood box was quite packed, but you can also see the super here on the ground has got a lot of bees in it as well. So with the 2 boxes, it can support quite a large population of bees. So it's a good idea just to wait and see, and wait for the honey flow to start. And so yeah, you wouldn't need to split your bees until they're completely packed, and you might go in and see queen cells being made, so then you might want to figure that out and split them then.
And take a split. And Simon's asking, everyone's obviously on splits in spring here, coming to Australia feeling a little bit earlier. Just to explain the requeening, just wondering, if he requeens his hive for next spring, does he kill off the existing queen before he introduces the new queen?
Yes, yeah, good question. Definitely, that's what you want to do. But if you're buying in a queen from a queen breeder, you don't want to do anything until you've got that queen in your hand. Your queen's arrived in the mail and you know she's alive and she's ready to go. So, because you really don't want to kill your old queen and then, you know, the new queen gets stuck in the post or ends up not being alive when you receive her. So that's the first thing. But once you've got her, you go in and find the queen that you want to replace, and you do kill her. You can put her in some alcohol, some isopropyl alcohol, and if you do that a couple of times with a couple of queens, you'll get this some alcohol with a really nice queen smell, which they can then put into old boxes as a swarm lure. Or you can just squash the queen. It's pretty brutal, but that's just the way of it. Then you wait 24 hours for that hive to recognise that they're queenless, and then you come back and pop the breeder queen into your colony. I actually made a video about that on the beekeeper.org, which is a really great resource for beekeepers. Look it up, beekeeper.org. Cool, any other questions, Trace? We might shut this hive up.
Yeah. Just what's the smallest size hive you can get?
Well, it sort of depends on the system you're going for. With a Langstroth hive, people can run, we call them nucleus colonies, so they can be, you know, they're small hives, they can be anything from 6 or 7 frames to, you know, 1 or 2 frames even. The 1 and 2 frame nucleus colonies require a lot more management, just due to the confined space, so you need to really watch the populations there. Some other hives, such as queen mating nukes, you get these things called baby nukes, which are 2 frame and they're half frames, so the frames are split across like that. I was actually watching a guy on YouTube called Sam Comfort who uses cut down Langstroth hives, and he uses barbecue skewers as frame rests. They're a little like a top bar hive, and lets the bees draw natural comb straight off the barbecue skewers, which I thought was really cool. So I'm just going to shake bees in here so I don't squash them when I'm putting this frame in, and just gently push these and make some space.
Is that a queen patch queen cell?
I think it's just a cup.
Oh, it's just a cup, yeah.
So this is what Mira was talking about. There's a queen cup here.
I saw the jagged edge, but it's just a bit of a brace. Anything in it?
Can you see? Get the light in it. So Mira's looking for an egg or a grub inside that queen cup. And
That looks empty.
if there's something in there, we know that this colony would be making a new queen. Is there any more questions, Trace?
Yeah, a couple of people have noticed, Pete, behind you on our flow hive, we've got a couple of supers, and just wondering, would you normally do that, or would you normally have 2 brood boxes?
You can have either, it just depends what you're going for. We put 2 supers on because this colony was quite strong and they wanted the room. Also, we had a spare super that we sort of needed to do something with, and that's been quite good for them. If you want 2 brood boxes, you can absolutely do that as well. It all just depends on the strength of your colony and what you're trying to achieve. It's a lot of beekeepers in cold climates swear by having 2 brood boxes because they can keep their brood nest really strong. Thanks, Mira. But generally we just use 1 brood box, but it all just depends on personal choice, really. Oh, you can see these bees.
Yeah, hear the,
They
you
don't
can
like
hear
it,
the,
and I smoke them and they
hear the change and the noise of the
We'll just
bees.
wait for them to go in. There they go. Thanks, Mira. Beekeeping is great with 2 people.
Good team sport.
Yeah, and the smoke's helping keeping the bees off while Pete puts the super back down. Should be an Olympic sport, maybe.
Wow, that is such a bump colony.
Whoa.
Oh, I squished some bees there. Oops. We'll save this wax, so I'll scrape it off and pick it up. It's not really a good idea to leave your wax lying around because it can spread pathogens, so we'll pick it up. I just cleaned that off so I'm not putting it on and squashing heaps of bees. You can see these guys here, they'll work it out. Generally the bees in the super are field bees, so they know where their colony is. They've already geolocated and they'll generally fly home.
How many bees do you think are in that hive, Pete?
Well, the common consensus apparently is that a bumper hive can 1,000 bees, but I'm not going to count them.
Yeah.
60,000, wow.
60,000, yeah, 50
Wow.
to 60, but that's like, yeah, it's a pretty packed colony.
One more question, Trace?
Yeah, great, because this sort of relates. Sorry, I was letting Pete concentrate. I didn't want to bombard him with a question while he was doing that heavy.
Can't do 2 things at once.
Lucky Mirror was there. Pete, Anne's asking, actually we've got Margie who's just down the road who's tuned in and really wanting to start beekeeping and just wondering when is a good time to start beekeeping?
Margie, if you're in this area, now is perfect.
Yep.
It's absolutely perfect. It's bang on the money. So what you want to do is try and find a beekeeper who's got a nucleus colony to sell and install it in your new hive. And the bees will have every chance of becoming successful because they'll jump right into spring and there'll be plenty of food for them. The queen will lay up really quickly and you won't have to wait as long for your honey crop to come in.
Perfect.
So yeah.
And maybe just another question on that brood box. I thought this was quite a good one. If you add an extra brood box for expansion, can it be put above the queen excluder later in the season? And once that brood has emerged, will the bees eventually fill those cells with honey?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes, definitely. That's what happens. You can use those frames then for an extra honey box. Obviously, it's not going to be a flow box, and you'll have to harvest that honey in a traditional way by the crushing and straining, or with a traditional extractor. So yeah, so if you do add your brood box, you can even just put frames that have brood in them up above the queen excluder, and that brood will just hatch out. All the nurse bees will go up to take care of it through the excluder. The brood will hatch out, and then the queen won't be able to lay any more eggs in those frames, and they'll eventually just become honey frames. So we'll just get the roof back on this colony, and thanks so much for tuning in and for all your great questions.